My name is Toya Chester. I'm from the United States, and we're here at the historic World Congress of International Socialist Alternative. Today we're going to be talking to Kshama Sawant from Socialist Alternative, Claire Laker-Mansfield from Socialist Alternative in the UK, Kat Galea from Socialist Action in Australia, Vincent Shu from International Socialist Forward in Taiwan, and Jaco Lam from Socialist Action in Hong Kong. So I wanted to start the day just asking a general question to everyone here at the table. We've seen the climate revolt points to the limited time left to stop environmental catastrophe. So how can we fight for a change radical enough to match that urgency?
I think that the global student strikes have been a really good start on that front, and it's shown really what's possible and that there is a lot of anger in society, and you can really feel that it's an international movement, which I think is really important. People are feeling that this is a problem we can work on together. I think that what would make it more powerful is if the trade unions also joined up with the student strikes, because that's when we can shut the economy down and show the establishment who really runs society and what we want. I think we need to link what the students are saying with what workers need, which is sustainable jobs and a future where we can live sustainably as well.
I think one of the things that's been really impressive about that movement is the way in which the young people who've been involved have been trying to ask the big questions about what climate change is ultimately caused by and how we can therefore change it. So the slogan, system change, not climate change, has become really widely taken up by young people. And I think that points in the right direction, because it's asking, what is it about the way our society is organised, which is allowing us to get into this situation where we're seeing what we saw in Australia, and rather than climate emissions coming down, rather than more trees being planted, we're seeing the opposite of that: deforestation, increasing emissions from fossil fuels and so on. And I think the question is, how is capitalism part of the answer to this, and is there an alternative to capitalism?
That's right, and I think millions of people around the world, especially the young people, as Kat mentioned, are drawing the conclusion that this is clearly related to systemic causes, and widely the conclusion is being drawn that you cannot address climate change, the climate catastrophe, really what we are facing, through lifestyle changes in developed countries. Really, if you look at the statistics on carbon emissions, for example, you can see that the vast majority of the carbon emissions are caused by corporate reasons, the fossil fuel industry. And so there's really no alternative but for the movement to, global movement, to understand that this poses the question of a democratic public ownership of the fossil fuel sector in such a way that it includes workers, as you said, in the trade union movement, and really talking about something that in the United States has come to be known as a Green New Deal, meaning can we shift our entire society in such a way that it's sustainable and at the same time really results in a flourishing of living wage unionized jobs, really something that provides a lifeline both of sustainability and of decent living standards, which should be possible in this wealthy global economy.
Speaking of the global economy, how can we have all of these activists, young people, workers, link up internationally to build an effective movement?
I think we've already seen some elements of that. I think the historic movement in Hong Kong, for example, you're seeing that the world is watching that, and that people have been mimicking the effects of that in the struggles in Catalonia, in the struggles in Chile, and also it's spreading to be about more than just one thing. It starts off as being about the bill in Hong Kong. It starts off about being the metro fare hike in Chile. It's about the struggle for independence in Catalonia, and people are watching and connecting and learning the experiences. And I think that's really important, that they're seeing that, and they're seeing that it's all connected. And you're seeing a lot of international solidarity of people saying, we stand with Hong Kong, we're all Catalonia. And the anthem against rapists in Chile has also spread around the world. And I think that people are starting to get more of an international connectedness. and a willingness to try to find some way to organize that and fight against the system as a whole.
Saying International Socialist Alternative, by definition, we are an international organization and movement because we understand that the problems that humanity and our planet faces are international, and the obstacles for us to achieve what we want to achieve, which is a humane and sustainable society, are also international, which is global capitalism. And what we bring as International Socialist Alternative to our movements is both an analysis, a political analysis of why this is happening, why the struggle against climate change, the struggle against sexual violence, and all of that is really linked to the struggle against capitalism. But we also, as Jacko was pointing out, in all our different countries where we are located, we are immersed, not just engaged, but immersed in social movements, and we are on the front lines with our fellow working people, with women who are fighting for their rights, with young people who are fighting on the university campuses. And I think it's really never been as heartening as it is right now in terms of the clarity that so many people are understanding. I think it was really striking what happened at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where it's not just Donald Trump who is obviously in a climate change denying mode and making mocking was absolutely courageous and inspiring activists like Greta Thunberg, but you can see that the international ruling class as a whole both refuses to provide any solutions to the climate crisis and the economic crisis that the majority is facing, but at the same time is completely stymied because they know that the revolt is building up. And I think the role of socialists in movements is to help guide those, the mood of revolt to actually winning victories on the ground in each of our countries, but then linking that to why we need a struggle against the system itself, and that it won't be enough to fight for reforms. We really need to fight for fundamental change.
So we've talked a bit about the climate catastrophe on a global scale, but I want to focus on what many people around the world have seen in Australia with the fires, the bushfires that have been happening. So I'm going to turn to you, Kat. How does it feel to witness these bushfires on a scale like never before?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of hard to start, like where to begin, because there's been so many different aspects of the crisis that we've just never seen before. Scientists in Australia and fire experts have been warning that these events are only going to get bigger, they're going to get more frequent, they're going to last longer, and there's going to be less time between seasons because of climate change. And this advice has been ignored, and what we've seen over the Christmas and New Year's period, where families are going to seaside towns, is thousands of people stranded on a beach, forced to flee into the water to escape the fires, and the images are terrifying. And I think what it shows is that climate change is real, and it's here, and it's now. It's not something that's going to happen in the far off future, and people are dying not just from the fires, but also from the smoke inhalation and these impacts that we haven't seen before. And we're seeing species that could be potentially wiped out. We're seeing historic national parks being wiped out. The Blue Mountains has lost almost 80%. And all these beautiful things that Australia is known for, our iconic wildlife, our koalas and things like that. The images that are coming out are just quite shocking, and people are very, very angry about it, and they're clearly linking it to climate change, and they're clearly linking it to the failure of the government.
And so how are young people and workers reacting? They're making these connections, but what are they doing?
Well, there was rallies called all around the country, around 30,000 people in Melbourne. They're angry, and they didn't want to leave. When the rally was over, people didn't want to leave. There was an occupation of the streets, and there was a very angry mood, a very anti-government mood, saying we want action on climate change. We want to fund the firefighters, who are mostly volunteers, and that the Prime Minister said that the firefighters enjoy doing it. And it's just been quite a tone-deaf reaction. He was forced to come back from a holiday in Hawaii. So there's a very big anti-government mood. But the problem also that people are seeing is that the Labor Party are no different, because the Labor Party support the Adani coal mine in northern Queensland. The Greens are providing no solutions either. They're only saying vote for us in Parliament. And so people feel very angry about it. They're coming out onto the streets. Everybody's talking about it. And people think that there needs to be much more investment, and it's clear. And so things such as taxing the big companies are coming up, ending fossil fuel subsidies, which is $29 billion. That could go into a fully funded fire service for a professional, skilled firefighters so that they could do prevention on these things. And so there's climate change is now overtaking the economy as the number one concern for people. And so people are coming out and they're looking for solutions to it because they can see that there's clearly a systemic failure and that none of the parties in power or the Greens are capable of providing a solution. And so we're going to these rallies in Australia and putting forward socialist solutions and mentioning things like Kshama mentioned, like the Green New Deal, and we're getting a very good response on that about sustainable jobs in Australia.
So maybe just to wrap up this idea, can you explain what international socialism has to do with actually fighting climate change?
Well, I think that climate change is one of the clearest expressions of the failure of capitalism, the fact that the future of our planet is literally at stake in the year 2020, and the capitalists, they're divided on this. They go to Kyoto, they go to Paris, they can't agree on any solutions. They're not even committing to the emissions reductions that they've previously said before. And it's one of the clearest indications that this system is failing. That in 2020 in Australia, one of the richest countries in the world, people are wearing masks walking down the street. You know, it's like I said before, it's not some dystopian future. This is it. This is real. This is now. And because capitalism, by its very nature, puts profit before all else, and it's about the private ownership of the means of production, you know, the factories, the offices, the power stations, all these kinds of things, and it's a chaotic system, and nothing is organized around the world. And they're trying to say it's not possible for us to not have coal mines. It absolutely is possible. We could switch to 100% renewables very, very quickly. But that needs to be done on the basis of global planning. You can't just do it in one country in Australia. It needs to be done all around the world. And that's what International Socialist Alternative are doing and organizing for. We need a global rearrangement of the economy, of the political sector, the social sector. It needs to be in people's hands, in the public's hands, and we need to democratically decide. And we know overwhelmingly that working class people around the world want action on climate change, and capitalism is not capable of providing the solutions. What we need is a planned economy, and a planned economy is a socialist economy, and that's what we're fighting for and putting forward.
Thank you. We're going to shift over to Claire in the UK. And people around the world were watching the elections and what was going on with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. But left-leaning workers and youth, it seemed, were deeply disappointed by the outcome of the British elections. So are things as bad as these results may suggest?
Well, I think that millions of people, when they woke up on the morning of the election, after the results had come out, to see a majority Tory government led by Boris Johnson, who's a particularly reactionary figure, they will have felt pretty sick, pretty upset, pretty disappointed. And of course, socialists are working class people. We shared that disappointment and shared that feeling. And I think what people are particularly worried about is we've had over 10 years of absolutely devastating austerity in Britain. It's now known as Food Bank Britain. We've got queues of people who are not able to afford to feed their children, and not necessarily people who are struggling to find work. Nurses, you know, people who are in professions are among those who are struggling just to be able to put food on the table. And I think that we were offered in that election the hope of an alternative to austerity, and the election of Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister and as the head of a government which will unfortunately be one which seeks to continue with austerity was obviously very disappointing. However, I think that in terms of the discussion that's gone on in Britain following that election result, we would emphasise the fact that this is not a government which is as strong as it appears. So Johnson now has a majority in the Parliament, but his support and the people who voted for him, that will be incredibly fragile, because actually the vast majority of people who lent their votes to the Tories, in some cases literally saying, well, this would be the only time I would vote Tory. They did so not because they support austerity policies, but because Johnson, in a cynical way, had used the issue of Brexit and the EU to suggest that by carrying out Brexit and leaving the EU, there will be some kind of end to these policies, and that there will be a future which would look brighter, that there might be a return of skilled jobs to areas of the country which have been decimated by decades of neoliberalism. But that means that actually the support that he has in society is extremely thin, and will be rapidly eroded as austerity continues, as people continue to suffer because of it. There is huge anger in society. That hasn't gone away. This election does not represent support for austerity policies. It does not represent support for policies which benefit only the rich, and working class people can get organised. And that's what we're trying to help do ourselves as Socialist Alternative in the UK.
So you spoke a bit about Boris Johnson and his terrible policies for the working class. Could you now speak a little bit about Jeremy Corbyn and his ideas, and is Corbynism dead?
Yeah. Well, I think that the manifesto which Labour put forward, from our point of view, it couldn't, it could go further. But actually what it did represent was a alternative to what was happening at that time. So he was offering, rather than further cuts, he was offering investment in public services. Rather than continuing to privatise parts of our public services, he was saying we should take back into public ownership some key sectors of the economy, for example, the railways and so on. And while that was limited, the reason why Corbyn came to be the leader of the Labour Party was because there was a huge appetite in society for an alternative to austerity politics, to neoliberalism, and to a lesser extent to capitalism itself. And Corbyn was a figure who was seen as offering that. And the question of whether Corbynism is finished is, has that desire to see that alternative gone away within society? Are there no longer working class people who are desperate for an alternative and who want to see it expressed in mainstream politics, if you like? Well, no, that hasn't gone away. In fact, I would say in some ways that has been strengthened in the last period. What, unfortunately, Corbyn's problem has been, and the reason why ultimately he lost the election, is he came to the head of a party which had been transformed in the last period into a party run in the interests of the ruling class, so dominated in Parliament in terms of its machinery, in local councils, by right-wing Blairites whose politics was anathema to what Corbyn was putting forward and to what working class people who voted for him wanted to see. So he has faced, over the last 4 years, while he's been the leader, a constant round of attacks from these people who've sought to undermine his leadership. And they've done that on all kinds of things, trying to force him into retreat on different questions. And one of the big things which they were able to succeed in really pushing Corbyn into retreat on was the question of Brexit, where he began to, rather than boldly putting forward what we would argue for, which is opposition to racism, opposition to nationalism, but a clear opposition also to the policies of a capitalist club in reality, which is the EU, which doesn't benefit working class people. Rather than doing that in a clear way and pointing to how you could have a Brexit in the interests of working class people rather than a deal with Trump, as Johnson is doing, and instead advocating a kind of blurred position, but one which appeared to many working class people as being simply wanting to reverse the referendum result.
Can you let us know what Socialist Alternative's plans are to engage with the struggle?
Well, we want to be at the heart of movements which are going to develop against the Johnson government, and we've put forward a number of proposals really to the movement for how we think things could start to go forward. One of those is that we're saying that there should be conferences of resistance organised in local areas, so bringing together trade unions, bringing together local campaigns, climate strikers, all of the people who've been involved in fighting back against the government up until now, but meeting to discuss what we now need to do in this new situation and how we can mobilise the biggest movement that we've seen in decades, which is what's really necessary to bring down this government. So that's one of the ideas that we're putting forward. And we're also, of course, working, as we always do, in every campaign that's organised at a local level to resist every single individual cut that's being made, to resist every attack that's made on working class people, and to try and link those struggles to what we think is necessary ultimately, which is a fight to change society more fundamentally to socialist ideas.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to the other side of the world and talk about the polarization that's happened in Taiwan.
甚至才一个14个月的时间，局势可以有180度的转变，也反映了未来台湾的政治局势肯定会是更加的不稳定。
So for the over past 14 months, there is a 180% change of the political situation in Taiwan. So we can say that in the next period, it will be a very unstable and uncertain period.
那我们可以看到，过去民进党执政的4年来，他也不断的推陈出新，去推动那一些反劳工政策啊、亲财团政策，比如说劳基法修2，或者去砍掉了台湾劳工的国定假日7天。
So this DPP government, they had attacked the workers with the counter reforms on the labor law, and also they cancelled the workers' holiday. And so this will trigger an anger of mass working class people.
尤其是在中美冲突的发展背景底下，有越来越多的台资啊，它将它的生产线啊，主要是那一些资本密集的生产线转移回来台湾。那这也给予了一个民进党政府更大的压力，要去推动更多有利于资本家而不利于工人的亲财团政策。
And under the escalation of the China-US conflict, more and more Taiwan capitalists, they move back from China back to Taiwan, and this will push the pro-capitalist government to push for more pro-capitalist policies, like lower the tax rates or deregulations, and this will further attack the working class.
同时，在这过去3年多的时间以来，我们可以看得到，台湾的劳工运动虽然还是脆弱的，但是它有一个明显的增长。那这也刺激了台湾的资产阶级，甚至是在台湾投资的外国资产阶级，要求民进党政府去推动更多的反工会政策，比如说去删除产职业工会的罢工权，或者是说去推动更多对于罢工的管制禁令。
We can see over the past 3 years ago, while the working class movement in general is still weak in Taiwan, but there is a certain radicalization and growth of the workers' movement in Taiwan. And we can predict the capitalists, they want to push the government to do more, like attacking the labor law and restrict the right to form union and strikes. And this will also trigger a new wave of working class struggle.
那在我们 ISF 从2016年11月成立以来，我们也一直在跟这些民进党政府的反劳工政策去做对抗，去捍卫台湾劳工的7天国定假日啦，去反对劳基法修2啦，甚至去推动一些有利于工人的政策，投入在这些抗争当中，也使我们的组织得到训练跟发展。
And International Socialist Forum in Taiwan has been involved in the working class struggle against this labor law counter reform, and also to defend the holidays of the workers. And we want to involve in this struggle and to provide the political analysis. And we also want to immerse in the experience of the union struggle in order to gain the support for socialism.
那最重要的事情，其实是在这些斗争的过程当中，让台湾那一些有反资本主义倾向的进步青年跟工人看到，在台湾我们是能够建立一个社会主义的替代方案，建立一个马克思主义的革命组织。
So we can, through our struggle, we can show to the workers and the youth in Taiwan that it is possible to build a working class party and also a Marxist revolutionary party in Taiwan.
那同时，在香港民主运动爆发到现在这7个多月的时间呢，在台湾的我们除了进行声援香港民主抗争的运动之外，我们也在台湾推动要求台湾政府给予香港抗争者在台湾的政治庇护权。
And we also campaign for the asylum right for Hong Kong protesters in Taiwan.
但是我们也去向民众揭露说，我们不能被动的把期待摆在这一个民进党政府身上。虽然他在口头上宣称他支持香港的抗争，他支持民主，但是事实上这7个多月以来，他的立场是虚伪的，他并没有给予这些流亡到台湾的香港运动抗争者以政治庇护权。
And we want to expose the hypocrisy of the China government, because while verbally they say they support the movement in Hong Kong, but over past 7 months, they refused to give the asylum right for the Hong Kong protesters.
根据《纽约时报》的报道呢，现在已经超过200多名的香港抗争者流亡在台湾。我们确信啊，实际的数字可能是更高，甚至也有很多人没有得到庇护权而被迫的回到香港。那他们面对的可能是10年以上暴动罪的控诉。
And now more than 200 Hong Kong protesters, they are exiled in Taiwan, and the real numbers can be more because many of them they were refused to stay in Taiwan, or they just get underground. And if they are deported back to Hong Kong, they can face a prison sentence for 10 years.
那我们推动这个争取香港抗争者在台政治庇护权的运动呢，不单单只是为了要表达我们对于香港民主抗争的支持，更重要的事情是我们希望去突出对抗中共独裁，不只是香港民主抗争的任务，也是台湾所有反对中共独裁、支持保卫既有民主权利的群众要共同去与香港抗争者，也包含中国国内那些反独裁人士团结起来，才能够让这个运动大步的向前。
And so our campaign is not only to show the solidarity to the movement in Hong Kong, but also we want to show that there's a need for the united struggle between the mass people and working class in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also in mainland China.
那同时，在我们的这个庇护权的运动当中，我们也去向支持的民众、关心的民众去宣传，香港现在的抗争呢，不论是现在还是未来，它需要把这个推动抗争的方向做成就是香港革命输出中国。那同时呢，也需要建立一个真正战斗性的群众性的工会，发动总罢工，才能更有力的挑战香港政府以及是背后的中共独裁。
And we also advocate for the movement in Hong Kong. There's a need to spread the movement from Hong Kong to China, because Hong Kong as one city cannot win. And also there's a need to build a mass genuine unions in order to organize a real general strike that can be powerful enough to defeat the government and also the whole capitalist system.
其实我们进行的这个运动是我们认为是有效的去揭露了民进党政府它并不是真正民主权利的捍卫者啊，只有中港台两国三地团结的群众抗争，才能够真正的争取到实质的民主权利。
So I think our campaign could successfully to expose the hypocrisy of the Chinese government and to show that we cannot rely on any capitalist force to fight for real democratic right. And there's a need for workers and the youth to organize themselves and in order to fight for these rights.
也去突出了只有马克思主义者才是真正的民主先锋了。
And to show that the Marxist is the real pioneer or the real fighters for democratic rights.
那同时，我们在台湾的组织也在这个运动当中有一个很大的增长，学习到了很多宝贵的经验。
And also our organization learned a lot of important lessons and the way of people how to conduct the struggle in Hong Kong, which is very useful for the movement in Taiwan and also in the whole world. And every week there are at least like 50,000, 100,000 of people marching on the street. And there's a very strong mood that this is the final battle to defend the democratic right. The only very little democratic rights still we have against the Chinese dictatorship. And this is the determination and the tenacity of the people. They feel they have no room to compromise, and it is a life and death question. And that's why people were the repression was very, very severe, and the police they arrest 7,100 people up to now, and the number of people arrested is more than the total number of people in the prison now. So if all of them will really go to prison, the government will need to double the number of prisons. And 16,000 tear gas were fired. So it's why every day there are around 90 pieces of tear gas used in Hong Kong as a very small and dense population. But all this did not stop the movement, and all this just strengthened the movement and to like the whip of the counter-revolution to make people angry. And every time the government tried to be offensive, it just caused more and more backlash.
It is inspiring the determination of the people of Hong Kong to stay out on the streets for so long. But where do you see the movement going from here?
Now the situation is complicated because of the coronavirus, and it has a huge effect in Hong Kong because there's a panic or social panic that people feel they cannot go on street, and this is but this will not solve the problem or eliminates the anger of the mass people, and the movement will turn into another direction, and especially for more adopt the method of organizing and unionizing, and more unions are being formed, and if this union are built in a democratic and a fighting way, it will be able to turn the direction of the movement to a more organized and working class struggle method, and this will really cause a big blow to the government.
So now we're going to go to Kshama Sawant from the U.S. First, we just want to congratulate the historic campaign where you beat the richest man in the world in the work of Socialist Alternative, along with yourself and the working class of Seattle. Congratulations. Can you talk a little bit about that historic victory and what it took?
Yeah, thanks, Toya. This was indeed a historic victory, not only for Socialist Alternative and working people in Seattle, but really it belongs to working class people everywhere, because it's a tremendous example of how even when you have everything stacked against you, the entire capitalist class, the political elite, and no less than the richest man in the world, as you said, Jeff Bezos, who heads up this trillion-dollar corporation, Amazon, with a global economic footprint, who's a company that is known the world over for deeply exploitative and oppressive working conditions, that when you have all of that stacked against you, you can still win. And this is a live example of that. But I think at the end of the day, despite all of that, the main backbone of our campaign was the political analysis that Socialist Alternative brings, which is the understanding that this campaign was going to be about who has the right to this city, the Amazon and big business and the Chamber of Commerce, or is it working people? And posing it in that way and bringing bold demands that ordinary people can mobilize around, like rent control free of corporate loopholes, taxing big business to fund a massive expansion of social housing, and a Green New Deal for Seattle's working people, and really understanding that rather than obey the conventional rule book, which says you should only bring forward what's acceptable to big business, don't rock the boat. Instead, do the exact opposite, which is really present a contrast between the corporate-dominated electoral politics and what working class politics represent. And I think that was, at the end of the day, that was what really helped us win our campaign.
So the voters in Seattle showed that they were ready for a socialist with socialist ideas. And these ideas are spreading across the country. It's apparent. Young people, workers are ready for a change. What are Socialist Alternative's plans for engaging with these newly radicalizing people?
So Socialist Alternative is really excited, all the way from Seattle to Boston and from Minneapolis to Houston. Our members are going to be joining thousands of other working people who are going to be campaigning for Bernie. We're going to be door knocking. And in our conversations, we're not only talking about how Bernie can win and how we can really bring about a shift in the United States, but we're also pointing out that while on the one hand, millions of people are ready for a change and are ready for a socialist, and in fact, many people who voted for Trump in 2016 will be supporting Bernie this year, we are also pointing out that at the same time, the Democratic establishment is in no way favoring this kind of shift. And while there are differences between the Republicans and Trump and the right wing on the one hand and the Democratic Party on the other, the problem is that one thing they have in common is their allegiance to Wall Street, their die-hard loyalty to big business and the elite. And that whole question of building a movement is also linked to the need for a new party for working people, because neither the Republicans nor the Democratic establishment provide an avenue for us to build a decent society.
So you previously mentioned taxing big business, which was something that Socialist Alternative ran your campaign on. And being in Seattle, where we have these huge corporations, all these CEOs, What are the plans to continue that fight for taxing big business?
Yes, as you said, Toya, Seattle is a wealthy city with all these CEOs. In fact, one of the people who lives in our district is the former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, who famously said, you can't have Medicare for all, you can't have a Green New Deal, that is all too much to expect. And on the other hand, you have the baristas who work at Starbucks, all the tens of thousands of working people who are in the city but are struggling to maintain a foothold because of the skyrocketing rents and the incredible cost of living, and the hundreds of thousands that have already been pushed out of the city and face long commutes every day. And so on the back of our historic victory, we want to make sure that we don't lose the momentum, that the movement doesn't get complacent, and understand that we have a huge opening to actually push through a serious Amazon tax, meaning a tax on big businesses, not on working people or small businesses. And in order to do that, we are going to have to build a movement. And that's why Socialist Alternative, in partnership with community organizations, progressive labor unions, hundreds of ordinary people who were part of our campaign and who've been fighting for social justice in our city, we have launched the Tax Amazon 2020 campaign. And that the idea is to raise taxes on big business so that we can fund an expansion of social housing, publicly owned affordable housing for working people, but in a green, energy efficient way, and really make sure that the question of the Green New Deal is and the fight against climate change is tied to the question of addressing the affordable housing crisis. And to be sure, we are going to face a major backlash from big business, so the movement needs to be prepared to really fight back, just like we did last year in the re-election campaign.
And speaking of that campaign, those victories have inspired people across the country and really around the world. What advice do you give to newly radicalizing people, activists, young people, to keep that fight going against inequality and oppression?
I think the starting point is something that I believe millions of people around the world, including in the Middle East and many other countries, are recognizing, which is that when we are as individuals, we are completely powerless against this deeply unequal society, a society that prioritizes profits and wealth consolidation for a few at the top at the expense not only of the lives of billions, but at the expense of our planet itself. Those are the questions we're posed with right now. And that's why in order to really be able to push back against the status quo that we're faced with globally, we're going to need to be collectively organized. And that's what the movements around the world are showing, that we can actually make change possible when we get organized, when millions of people come together. But in addition to that, as I would say, as a message from International Socialist Alternative to everyone who's watching this, is that we also need a very strong political analysis to show us that it's not only important to fight hard for reforms like sustaining the National Health Service in the UK, for democratic rights in Hong Kong, for the rights of Muslim people against religious persecution in India, for Medicare for all in the United States, and for affordable education. All of this is going to be hard to win, because we're going to have to fight against big business and the elite to win it. It's not going to be easy, but that's not going to be enough. We've seen over and over again, decade after decade, that every time labor movements, social movements win victories, those victories are snatched away from us. I think that's a really important and also sober reminder that fighting for reforms is not going to be enough. We have to go much farther and fight for systemic change. And as a socialist, I would say the kind of society we need is a global socialist society, a society that harnesses the incredible wealth and the productivity and the cooperation that we have among working people, human beings, in order to provide a decent and indeed a high standard of living for all working people in a sustainable way, so that we actually have a planet to live in, and a society not only that will address the economic problems that people are facing under capitalism, but also a society that is free of oppression, free of racism, sexism, misogyny, sexual violence, a society that allows trans people and people of color to live and thrive. And such a society is possible. It's worth fighting for, but it is going to be a society that will not have billionaires. As Bernie Sanders said, you can either have you can't have a society with billionaires, because you can either have a society with billionaires and billions of poor people and people who are struggling, or you can have a world where everybody thrives and you have a sustainable planet, but no billionaires. And I think millions of people want to fight for that latter kind of world, so let's fight.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to a discussion at the historic World Congress of International Socialist Alternative.